Part 1. The exciting plan. James had always wanted to visit New York City. He had seen pictures of the bright lights, tall skyscrapers, and busy streets, but he had never been there himself. One evening, while browsing flight deals, he saw a great offer for a weekend trip. Without thinking too much, he booked a ticket. He felt excited and a little nervous. Traveling alone to such a big city would be a new experience. The night before his trip, James packed his suitcase carefully. He made a list of everything he needed: clothes, phone charger, toiletries, and a notebook for writing down his thoughts. He also checked the weather forecast. It looked like it would be sunny during the day but chilly in the evenings. He set his alarm for early morning and went to bed, but it was hard to fall asleep with so much excitement on his mind. Lying in bed, James started imagining all the places he wanted to visit. Would he have time to see everything? He wanted to walk through Central Park, try the best pizza in the city, visit the Statue of Liberty, and watch the sunset from a tall building. The list was long, and he knew he had to plan his time well. He finally fell asleep, dreaming of the adventure ahead. Meanwhile, his phone buzzed with a message from his best friend, Mark. "Have a great trip, man. Send me pictures of Times Square." James smiled and replied, "For sure, I'll tell you all about it when I get back." Even though he was traveling alone, he felt like his friends were with him in spirit. Part 2. The journey begins. The next morning, James woke up before his alarm even rang. He quickly got ready, grabbed his suitcase, and called a taxi to the airport. The roads were quiet, since it was still early. As he looked out of the window, he thought about all the places he wanted to see in New York. He hoped he would have enough time to visit everything on his list. At the airport, James checked in his luggage and went through security. The line was long, but he passed the time by listening to music and watching other travelers. He liked observing people at the airport. Some were rushing, others were relaxed, and some looked just as excited as he felt. When he finally reached his gate, he found a seat and waited for his flight to be called. While waiting, he bought a coffee and a small sandwich. He didn't want to be hungry during the flight. He also took out his notebook and started writing a list of things he wanted to do when he arrived. 1. Find a good pizza place. 2. Walk through Times Square at night. 3. Take a boat tour around the Statue of Liberty. His list kept growing, and the more he wrote, the more excited he became. When his flight was finally called, he grabbed his backpack and walked toward the plane. As he found his seat by the window, he smiled to himself. "This is it," he thought. "I'm really going to New York." The engines roared, and soon, the plane was in the sky. The adventure had begun. Part 3. First impressions of New York. When it was time to board, James found his seat by the window. He loved watching the ground disappear as the plane took off. The flight wasn't very long, but he still felt impatient. He couldn't wait to land and start his adventure. He spent the time reading about different places in New York and planning his schedule. After landing at JFK Airport, James collected his suitcase and stepped outside. The city air felt different, busier, more energetic. He hailed a yellow taxi and gave the driver the address of his hotel. As they drove through the city, he stared out the window in amazement. The buildings were massive, and the streets were full of people. It was exactly how he had imagined, but even more exciting. His taxi driver, an older man with a thick New York accent, noticed his excitement. "First time in the city?" he asked with a smile. James nodded. "Yeah, I always wanted to come here." The driver laughed. "You're gonna love it. Just watch out for the crazy traffic." James chuckled. The man was right. Cars were honking everywhere, and pedestrians crossed the streets fearlessly. As the taxi neared his hotel, James felt a growing sense of adventure. He was finally here, in the city that never sleeps. He thanked the driver, paid the fare, and stepped onto the busy sidewalk. The energy of New York surrounded him, and he couldn't wait to explore. Part 4. Exploring the city. At the hotel, James checked in and took the elevator to his room. He dropped his suitcase on the bed and freshened up. His room had a small balcony with a view of the busy streets below. He stood there for a moment, taking in the sounds of car horns, distant voices, and city life. It felt surreal to finally be in New York. His first stop was Times Square. As soon as he stepped out of the subway, he was surrounded by flashing billboards and giant screens. People were everywhere, tourists taking pictures, street performers dancing, and locals walking quickly to their destinations. The energy of the place was incredible. As he walked through the crowds, James noticed a man creating giant soap bubbles. Children ran after them, laughing as they popped. Nearby, a musician played a saxophone, filling the air with jazz. James took a deep breath, feeling like he was inside a movie. Feeling hungry, James decided to try some classic New York-style pizza. He found a small pizza shop with a long line outside. It must be good if so many people are waiting, he thought. When it was finally his turn, he ordered a big slice with extra cheese. The first bite was amazing. The thin, crispy crust and gooey cheese made it one of the best pizzas he had ever eaten. Part 5. A walk in Central Park. After finishing his pizza, James decided to visit Central Park. He wanted to take a break from the busy streets and enjoy some nature in the middle of the city. He walked to the nearest subway station, bought a ticket, and took the train uptown. The subway was crowded, but it moved quickly. Soon, he arrived at the park entrance. Stepping into Central Park felt like entering a different world. The noise of the city faded, replaced by the sounds of birds and the rustling of trees. People were jogging, walking their dogs, and sitting on benches, enjoying the fresh air. James strolled along the winding paths, feeling more relaxed with every step. He stopped by a small lake where people were rowing boats. The water sparkled under the afternoon sun, and he watched as couples and families enjoyed their time on the water. A few artists sat nearby, sketching the beautiful scenery. Inspired by them, James took out his notebook and wrote about his experience so far. As he walked deeper into the park, he discovered a charming bridge with a view of the city skyline. He stood there for a while, taking in the sight. This is exactly how I imagined New York, he thought. The combination of nature and skyscrapers made the city feel magical. Part 6. The unexpected meeting. While exploring Central Park, James noticed a woman struggling to take a picture of herself. She was holding her phone at an awkward angle, trying to capture both herself and the beautiful trees behind her. Smiling, James walked up and offered to take the picture for her. She laughed and handed him the phone. "Thank you. I never get the angle right." James took a few pictures and gave the phone back. "Perfect. You're a great photographer," she said, looking at the photos. "I'm Emma, by the way." They started talking and realized they had a lot in common. Emma was also visiting New York for the first time. She was from Chicago and had always dreamed of seeing the city. They decided to walk through the park together, sharing stories about their travels and their favorite places. James enjoyed having company. Exploring a new city was exciting, but it was even better when shared with someone else. They stopped by a street performer who was playing the violin beautifully. For a moment, they just stood there, listening to the music. Both felt like they were part of something special. Part 7. Sunset at the Empire State Building. As the sun started to set, James and Emma decided to go to the Empire State Building. They wanted to see the city from above at night. They took a taxi, chatting the whole way. The excitement in the air was growing as they arrived at the famous building. They bought their tickets and took the elevator to the top. As the doors opened, James gasped. The view was breathtaking. The entire city stretched out before him, glowing with thousands of lights. Cars moved like tiny ants below, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. "This is incredible," Emma whispered. James nodded, unable to look away. He took a deep breath, feeling truly lucky to be here in this moment. He pulled out his phone to take pictures, but he knew no photo could capture the feeling. Standing there, seeing New York in all its glory was unforgettable. They spent a long time at the top, watching the city transform as the night took over. The bright lights of Times Square and the bridges glowing in the distance were mesmerizing. The endless streets filled with life. It was a view neither of them would ever forget. Part 8. A night to remember. After leaving the Empire State Building, James and Emma decided to explore the city at night. They walked through Times Square again, now even brighter than before. The neon signs lit up the streets, and the energy of the city felt stronger. They found a small cafe that was still open and decided to have a late-night snack. Over coffee and dessert, they talked about their dreams and their travels. It felt like they had known each other for much longer than just a few hours. Before saying goodbye, they exchanged phone numbers. "If you ever visit Chicago, let me know," Emma said with a smile. James grinned. "And if you come back to New York, I'll be your tour guide." They laughed, knowing that this trip had given them not only amazing memories, but also a new friendship. As James walked back to his hotel, he felt a deep sense of happiness. This trip had been everything he had hoped for and more. He had seen incredible sights, met interesting people, and experienced the true magic of New York. Part 9. Heading home. The next morning, James packed his suitcase and checked out of his hotel. He took one last walk through the streets before heading to the airport. He stopped at a coffee shop, sipping his drink and thinking about everything that had happened. At the airport, he found a quiet spot and took out his notebook. He wrote about his favorite moments: the view from the Empire State Building, the walk through Central Park, and meeting Emma. This trip had changed him in ways he didn't expect. As his plane took off, he looked out the window, watching New York disappear below. He knew he would come back one day. The city had left a mark on him, and there were still so many places to explore. With a smile, he closed his eyes and let himself dream of his next adventure. As the plane soared higher, James felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia. His trip to New York had been an unforgettable experience, filled with new discoveries, unexpected friendships, and moments that would stay with him forever. He knew this was just the beginning of his adventures. There were so many places left to explore, and he couldn't wait to see where life would take him next. Have you ever traveled to a new city and had an experience that changed you? What was the most memorable part of your journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. See you in the next adventure.